mics, if you would rather stand at this stage, feel free to go to the side or the back and just stand. That's fine by me. So now that you're refreshed, I guarantee that I won't spend more than about 5-6 hours to do my part, so that shouldn't take that long. Every time I stand up here, our online numbers go up, so we're going viral right now. So do you remember when going viral used to be a good thing? Okay, so around teaching and learning, what I want to do really is just give you some big picture ideas. Students in the room, you've been students for 10, 11, 12 years, so you're getting pretty good at this stuff, but there's still some big picture items that have come along in the last few years that I think are worth bearing in mind. And I like to give some information at these sorts of events because it's good to be able to have conversations between parents and students. That really enriches the learning process. It doesn't mean you're going to become, educational researchers or anything like that, but it means you can just have a decent conversation around some things, some big picture items that actually make a big difference. So we're really talking about studying smarter, so thinking about study methods and ways of thinking about how to study. I'm also going to give you a couple of personalities online that are worth looking up. Because they've got some good video tips and material that can also assist you in a bit more detail. One of them is a guy called Ali Abdal. He is he's now a fully qualified doctor, and at the time when he was making his first videos, he was still at university. I think it was Cambridge University in England, and he came out with very, very good results, and he also studied what study worked best for students within the medical realm. And he's got some really good tips and tricks and ideas that help students. I had some students go away and have a look at some of this stuff last year, and they were quite impressed by the material. Now, I'm not going to show any of the material here, but he's got a YouTube channel that has several sub-channels sitting in there. One of them is how to study for exams. And he talks about his Cambridge University study, how to study for exams. And one of the things that I like is these evidence-based revision and study tips. And that's what I'm going to really focus on, but there's lots of other material there as well. The other thing he likes to do is podcasts on how to use different types of technology to do study and work. So you might be interested in that sort of thing as well. So that's on YouTube. His name's Ali Abdal. Now, this is him talking. Now, you're not going to hear him because I've turned the volume down. He talks very fast, but he's very clear and very easy to understand. He has a lot of information that's worth listening to. This is him talking about his evidence-based study tips. So I recommend it's worth actually having a look there. But I'm just going to give you a very brief summary about what he's talking about. He looks at a paper which is the end result of a huge research project where they collected all the information about all the different studies methods that students use at school and in university as well. And that's the name of the research project, and they're the authors down the bottom. So they had a look at this, and what they found was if they looked at all these different study techniques, elaborative interrogations, self-explanation, summarization. Some of them are familiar, summarizing, we do a lot of summarizing. Elaborative interrogation is when you ask questions about the text and write down the answers. Self-explanation is when you tell a story to yourself about particular aspects of the work that you're learning. It's like you're explaining to yourself, so it's a way of memorizing things. Keyword mnemonics, they're just how you memorize things by using keywords to assist your memory. Imagery use for text learning, that's where you might draw or photograph something to help you remember some text or some material that you're trying to learn. Rereading, practice testing, distributed practice, and interleaved practice. They looked at all of these and they had a look and said, what are the ones that work and which ones are more and less effective? So when looking at working smarter, the summary that Ali gives on this is that the low utility, that's the ones that people do a lot of but don't necessarily give you the big high impact returns on your learning, or you might have to do more of it to get the same amount of learning, are things like highlighting, rereading texts, and summarization. Now that's a big surprise when I read that, because they're three of the big things that we do in classes. Now we're not saying there's nothing wrong with doing any of these, and a lot of people like highlighting, and because they enjoy it, they actually learn from the text because they like doing the highlighting with the colors. But if you look at it from a research perspective, they're saying there are better ways that are more productive. So the better ways that are more productive than highlighting or rereading or summarizing is these ones. Practice testing, so where you do questions, real live questions, practice exams, etc., those sorts of things. And the other one is distributed practice. Now, distributed practice is the thing that makes the best use of your memory, because the problem with memory is that if you learn, imagine that big solid red line is you learning during a lesson, and you learn 100% of everything the teacher tells you while you're sitting in that lesson. We know that if we wait for an hour, we will have, on average, forgotten 50% of what we learned, even though we thought we understood it. And then, on average, within 24 hours, 70% of it's gone. And then within a week, 90% of what we learn has disappeared. Now, that's if we don't use that information. Like, we learn it, and then we go and do other things. So that's called the forgetting curve. Now, the trouble with that is that if your assessment is that far away in time, you're not going to be in a real good place, are you, as far as the knowledge that you've got? If you just learnt it once, yeah, got it, sir, and then left it, and then it sort of dribbles away over time. So what we need to do is we need to do distributed practice, which means we periodically top up by practicing, doing it. Sometimes it might be through doing a bit of rereading, but usually it's by using that information a few times. Now, the good thing is that the more times you do it, the less you have to top up. Because the learning, as you learn more, the learning slope gets shallower, so you don't forget as quickly. So that makes sense, doesn't it? The more things you do more often, the more likely you are to remember it and not forget it. So that makes sense. So that means that by the time you get to your assessment, hey, like your final couple of revisions, and you don't need that much to keep on top of that real high level of memorizing that information. And that's because our brain does not hang on to stuff that it doesn't use. Our brain is built to remember stuff that's important, and if it's important, it means we use it over and over and over again. That's why people that rehearse music gets very, very good if they rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. They're just getting better and better and better. Athletes, better and better and better. Why? Because you're doing it over and over again and topping up that skill. So that's one thing to bear in mind. So there's two techniques there that we talked about. Another thing that we know happens is that if we are setting ourselves up for final exams and things like that, we've got a lot of work to do in between now and when those things come along later on. So during this year, you'll be aware of the seemingly endless amount of stuff that's coming through. So we want to be careful about that, because what happens is that we know students and human beings in general are going to say, there's just not enough time to do all this stuff. How am I going to manage to get through this? There always seems to be something else to do. And what we want to do is we want to work smarter, because we've got so much stuff to do, we need to work smarter. A thing that Mr. Campbell said last week was that if you're smart about the way you organise your work, you're trying to... Do you remember the term in the pandemic about flattening the curve? There's the same sort of thing around your work. If you start earlier, and if you spread out your work, your revision, you will flatten your curve, so that although you're doing the work that you need to do, you're not working as intensely all the time and getting things piling up on top of each other. So you're trying to flatten the curve. So we want to get to a situation where we don't feel we're stuck in a state of permanent catch-up, because that's demoralizing, and you can get quite anxious about that. Everybody does. When it piles up, you get anxious. We don't want to feel like we've reached our academic limit. You won't have, but you'll feel like you have, because your brain gets tired and you feel like, oh, I can't learn any more about that, and you get demoralized. We don't want to be in the situation where we think that unless we don't sleep, don't do exercise, throw away our social life, that there'll not be enough hours available to do our study well. We want to avoid those circumstances. There's a guy called Cal Newport, so this is the second person you might want to have a look at. Cal Newport is a person that did really well at school and then went to university and studied how to do really well at school. He did his research and his PhD on how to do really good at school and also university. And he wrote several books. One of them is called How to Be an A Student, and he's written about 4 other ones about how to do really well at study. He said that the thing about there is not enough time that's a false way of thinking. He said that's wrong-minded. The problem is not the number of hours that you work, but rather how each hour is spent. And he talks about this formula. He said there's a formula that says work accomplished is equal to the amount of time you spend times the intensity of the focus that's happening at that time. That makes sense, doesn't it? It's like you're working for a time, and if you work a bit harder during the same time, you're going to get more done. So normally what happens is, if we spend too much time and our intensity is low, what happens is our work accomplishment will drop off. We get tired and it drops off. We want to try and avoid that. So when we do sit down, we want to be really focused and keep that focus, because what will happen is, even if we spend the same amount of time, our intensity and our work accomplishment will go up. And that's the ideal situation. Well, what about, it might even be better that if you keep your intensity up, you might actually be able to work less and still get the same result, which means you can have more social time, make sure you can exercise and all those sorts of things. So a term that he uses for this is called pseudoworking. That's when you look and feel like you're working, but you're not being productive. So that's when your intensity is low, okay? He calls pseudoworking low intensity work. And if you do that, therefore, you spend a long time working, but your thinking is inefficient. Your productivity is inefficient. Now, I want to tell you about one really important thing about this, and if you can take away one thing from this evening from my bit, it's this. One of the things that causes low intensity or reduced effectiveness of study is been found to be media multitasking, and that can come in different forms. One is if you've got music or a movie clip going somewhere within your environment that you're aware of. And the other one, the more common one and probably the more worrying one, is where you've got social media going that's not related to your work. This is the little tiny writing down the bottom is another research paper from another research team that studied what happens when people try to learn but they're being distracted by media multitasking. They found that media multitasking interferes with attention and working memory. It negatively affects GPA. That would be bad, right? For us, 11s and 12s. We don't want that. Test performance, recall, reading comprehension, note-taking, self-regulation, and efficiency. That's a pretty big list of things we want to really avoid in year 11 and 12, isn't it? They found that students also struggle to accurately assess the impact of the multitasking. So even if you do think it affects you, you don't realise how much it affects you. And the studies firmly established a significant drop in academic performance due to media multitasking. So what sort of size are we talking about? Are we talking about a couple of percent? Well, they found this. They found that if they have a group of students doing high volume text messaging, another group doing medium amounts, and another group doing low, then the ones in the high text messaging group perform worse by 1 letter grade. So that's an A dropping to a B or a B dropping to a C. If you want to go percentage, that's 20-25% drop. That's huge, isn't it? And more surprisingly, that's regardless of gender, and it's also regardless of what your starting GPA is. So it affects a person that's in an A grade as much as it affects a person at a C level. So that's worth thinking about, having a conversation about. So it's a good idea if we avoid this pseudo work. So how do you avoid pseudo work? Well, plan your learning time. Make sure that when you go there, you're ready, so you can be high intensity and deliberate. Spend 5 minutes at least planning every day. Use your diary, that's what it's for. Make sure you know what you're doing, write it down, check it off. There's actually psychological benefit from doing a list and then ticking it off. It flicks a little bit of something in your brain, and it actually reinforces doing something on a to-do list when you tick it off. Turn off all your social media and your phones during study, and it's been proven that having it turned off and next to you is still affecting you, because your brain is thinking, what about if I turned it on, would there be a message from my friend? Even up to the thing being about 15 or 20 meters away from you. So if you can, put it in a different suburb and go and get it later. No, just turn it off, put it somewhere out of, so you definitely can't see it, hear it, or hopefully not think about it. And then go back to it later once you've finished your work. Start all your assignments the day you get them. That doesn't mean you're going to finish them the day you get them, but start at least planning the day you get them. This will flatten that curve out and make your workload more even and more manageable. And the beautiful thing about that is, if something untoward occurs, like you're suddenly given an extra shift the week before your exam, it gives you flexibility. Or someone like grandma gets ill and you've got to go and visit them during the weekend because you want to go and see how they are. That's great. If you give yourself that flexibility, it stops you having to panic about, but I won't be able to finish my assignment, because you're on top of it. Okay. Now that's easier said than done, but if you do plan, even a few percentage better is better overall, isn't it? Plan to finish all the assignments days or a week before the due date. Give yourself a buffer zone, so if something happens, you've got time to fix it up. You can get feedback, get more feedback. And I suggest have a look at the Cal Newport material. It's worthwhile. Just look. He's got video clips. That's an easy way to look at some of the material. You don't have to go and read his book, but have a look at his video clips. Cal Newport is his name. During the course of the year, we do study skills workshops. Elevate is one of the organisations that comes in. It's been proven successful last year, so some of those are being booked in for this cohort. So look forward to those. Make sure you're not going to be away on those days. They're usually in the afternoon for a session. The other things you can do is make sure you check the college diary. There's lots of information in there about study skills and tips and tricks around how to make sure you organise yourself. There's a couple of different suggestions on how to organise homework. One of them has a diagram that looks a bit like this. It talks about how to take a slot of time in your homework and to slice it up so that the first bit always happens, the last bit always happens, even if the middle bit doesn't, because you don't actually have an assignment occurring or you haven't been set work. That orange bit is the set work. But just being, it's called the time slot model. So that's in the diary. Have a look at that. That might give you a few ideas. And also, obviously, consult your most valuable resource, which is your teachers. They're the experts in the field. They know exactly how to advise you in what to do. So I'm hoping that that's given you a few ideas. Now,